You're listening to the Skeptics Guide to the Universe, your escape to reality.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptics Guide to the Universe. Today is Thursday, March 5th, 2026, and this is your host, Stephen Novella. Joining me this week are Bob Novella.
Hey, everybody.
Kara Santa Maria.
Howdy.
And Jay Novella.
Hey, guys.
Evan is out this week because his schedule was not flexible enough because of his whole, taxes.
The work situation.
Yeah. It's knee-deep in taxes.
Yeah, he's always so railed, at this time of year. I feel bad for him because it is like a slow
death.
It's a slow death until the end happens. When's the last date? I always forget that date.
April 15th usually. Sometimes it's like weirdly a day or two different.
It's like the first Monday closest to the April 15th or whatever. It can't fall on a Sunday, right?
Oh, right.
So, Jay.
Yeah.
I know we've been talking about Artemis a lot, so I'm sure you've heard that Artemis 3 is no longer going to land on the moon.
Yeah, we got to talk about this. I mean, first of all, they figured out what was wrong with Artemis 2. They moved it to April of this year.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom line is that they found out that there was a helium flow interruption. And that, of course, is not good. That helium, from my understanding, the helium is what they pump in when they're using the rocket fuel, they're pumping in the helium to take up that empty space. And I think it balances the pressure and all that. Very, very important to pressurize those tanks and make sure everything is flowing at the speeds and everything that they want. And without that working perfectly, who knows what the result could have been? It could have been fatal. And that's what all of this worry is about. They want to make sure that nobody dies, and that there's no explosions. The basics, right? It was a non-trivial fix, but it didn't require a major redesign, which is fine. It's okay to have delays, and it's all part of the system.
We'll talk about delays. So Artemis 3 is no longer scheduled to land on the moon.
Yeah, and like Steve, the detail about that is they changed Artemis 3 to essentially another.
They added a mission
test. Yeah.
So they're keeping the numbers sequential, but the Artemis 3 mission is now the Artemis 4 mission, and Artemis 3 is now a low Earth orbit, just complete testing mission, which is something I was interested in. I was curious about it anyway, because I know they're still trying to nail down which lander they're using and all that stuff. And how could they possibly go land on the moon in 2027 if they haven't tested all of the new stuff out? So that's what they're doing in Artemis 3. Now in low Earth orbit, they're going to check rendezvous and docking maneuvers between Orion spacecraft and commercial lunar landers. There's two now. SpaceX and Blue Origin are each making a commercial lunar lander. And the Axiom Extravehicular Mobility Unit spacesuits. So they are going to be testing all that out in low Earth orbit in 2027, and then in 2028 now, their Artemis 4 is scheduled to land on the moon.
So
I mean, they do that, right? This is what they did preparing for Apollo.
What were 1 and 2 then?
1 was uncrewed trip around the moon.
Yeah.
Okay.
2 is a crewed trip around the moon. 3 was land on the moon. But now 3 is low Earth orbit, test out all these systems. 4 is land on the moon.
Sounds reasonable.
It does, except I guess the question is, why did they add a bunch of systems between 2 and 3? If
they didn't
why
add these systems. I think they were expecting to have them available earlier.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know how they were expecting to land on the moon without ever explicitly testing the landers.
Yeah, It seems like 2, if they're going to do a crewed orbit around the moon, it should have all the stuff.
Yeah.
And new stuff shouldn't be breaking.
Well, remember,
you've got to kind of start over.
The first Apollo mission to land on the moon was Apollo 11. They took
but we'd never
10
done this
missions
before.
to check each piece of equipment out. I know, but we're going with all new equipment.
Yeah, that's true.
It all has to be checked out. I was actually surprised. They're going to land on the third go. That's pretty bold. I guess it was too bold.
Yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't be surprised if they throw another one in there.
Nothing would surprise me at this point.
Yeah. Right.
So when is Artemis 4 supposed to happen?
28. But they're also, again, this is the NASA spin they're putting on this, and it may all be true, but they're saying, all right, so we're going to add this other mission to really make sure all these individual components work. Then we're going to land on the moon on Artemis 4. But they're saying with this extra mission, it will set us up to be able to have annual missions. We will be able to frequently launch ships. So that's what they're trying to get to.
Okay.
I mean, I get that. And, it's complicated, right?
Yeah.
The funding is complicated. The political will is complicated. NASA isn't just a space organization, but they have to deal with politics on a level that I don't think most of us realize.
Yeah. I mean, the
And
director is politically appointed.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that there's a lot of that going on. And when we only can find out so much, and they're only going to talk about so much. But I'm disappointed. I really am, just because I get kind of psyched up, and it's always a hard letdown, when I'm feeling like something's going to happen next week, and it's like, oh, it's going to be 2 years.
But
from now, whatever.
you just have to be in that mindset. You cannot
gotcha.
get
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, but imagine what it's like I have a friend who, granted, she doesn't work on crewed missions at all, but she does a lot of low Earth, airplane missions for data collection. And she's also involved in a lot of spectrometers that go into space. And the disappointment that she feels when something gets scrapped, somebody who's worked on this for so long. And then it's like, imagine what that's like when you hear, okay, we're not even, or we're pushing back, or we didn't make the window, or something went wrong. It's like,
Yeah.
all those hardworking scientists and engineers.
Imagine a horrible accident that could kill it, the entire
That would
thing.
be way
That
worse.
Can you imagine? Oh, we did it on the first go in the 60s, and we can't do it now without killing people. Not that people didn't die in the 60s, which they did, especially that nasty fire, but it could absolutely kill it. So yeah, take your, do what you got to do to be
that's
very,
true.
very
Still
safe.
better. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, they were planning essentially on using some of these systems for the first time, when they were landing on the moon.
Yeah,
And I
that's
guess they thought
nuts to
that wasn't a
me.
great idea.
Yeah. It's not a great idea.
All right, Bob, you're going to start us off with a quickie. Tell us about the Thatcher effect.
If you insist. Thank you, Steve. This is your Quickie with Bob. I recently came across this article. It really helped me appreciate at a deeper level probably one of the creepiest optical illusions that I know. In 1980, Professor Peter Thompson, psychologist at the University of York, introduced it. Write that one down. Write that one down, man. Introduced the Thatcher effect, or Thatcher illusion. So this is essentially two upside down pictures of Margaret Thatcher, who was then British Prime Minister. Now, the two upside down faces seem basically the same, or at least very similar. There's no red flags that something is seriously out of whack when you're looking at them. But when you flip them right side up, though, one pic is basically a bit of a horror show. And it's just creepy and wrong. And it's because the eyes and the lips are upside down.
Yeah, I've seen this before. Yeah.
It's fairly common. If you don't know this illusion, just Google it. Google Thatcher effect, come back. And Steve, we'll just pause the show and wait. Wait a second. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work. Sorry. So why can't we see this monster's face when it's upside down? Why is there, like I said, no real red flags that something is wrong? And the answer is, of course, interesting, and it illuminates how our brains evolved to process faces. It's thought that when our brains see a face, it boots up, if you will, a specific cognitive module that's optimized to see faces holistically, right? And I hate that word, holistic. I want to say gestalt, right? As a gestalt. It sees the face as a gestalt. We don't process the individual parts of a face, but the whole thing together, right? The spatial relationships, the proportions, all that good stuff. This is called configural processing. This takes place in which area of the brain, do you think? Do you know offhand?
The facial recognition area.
Close enough.
gyrus?
It's the FFA, fusiform face area.
Yeah.
What does fusiform mean? I didn't look that up.
Specifically, fusiform means that it's tapered at both ends.
Oh, okay.
Like imagine what a muscle looks like, right? It's bulging in the middle and tapered at both ends.
Okay. So when a face is upside down, though, our brain doesn't process it as a face anymore, right? The FFA says, that's not my job. So a more general purpose object recognition process is used, and that's less efficient. And this is called featural processing. And as you might assume, that this evaluates the individual components of objects, and it works fine for chairs and cars, and especially things that are not clear or unfamiliar. It's great. It's great for that, but it's just not as efficient as this holistic processing. So this is how important our face is to our species, which makes a lot of sense since we're so social, right? We need like a hyper optimized recognition system just for faces, and it's really primarily for faces. I'm trying to think
it's
of what
just
else it would be
faces.
used for.
That's why we see faces and things that aren't faces.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's dedicated cortex. I mean, that's the whole idea.
Right. And then so cartoon faces, it would work for that
Right.
too, right? But it's interesting though, because you're looking at this upside down face. So when you're looking at it using featural processing, you see the eyes, and the eyes are actually right side up in the upside down face. And you see that it's like, those are eyes, but you're just not looking at the whole gestalt of it,
Yeah,
right?
so somebody with prosopagnosia probably wouldn't fall for the illusion because they have a hard time recognizing the gestalt of faces, and they recognize people by specific features.
Good point. Exactly. I mean, maybe is that one of the primary problems though, that it's not engaging that specific module in the brain?
There's different versions of prosopagnosia, and it can vary. Like there's acquired and there's, congenital. And so there probably are different etiologies of it, but I can imagine that there's a form where they just don't have that gestalt like processing.
That is correct. Some people with prosopagnosia do not experience the Thatcher effect.
Right.
It's certainly not as profoundly as people without prosopagnosia.
Yeah. Do you know who else might experience this Thatcher illusion? There's evidence that chimpanzees and even rhesus monkeys may experience it. I'm not sure how confident they are in it, but that makes sense, especially for chimpanzees. Rhesus monkeys maybe not as much, but there is some evidence apparently. So this has been your Weird Face Quickie with Bob. Back to you, Steve.
All right, thanks, Bob. Jay, you're going to tell us about some more lunar news.
What?
You're going to tell us about lunar chickpeas.
All right, before I get to that, would you guys eat moon regolith?
Only if I want to
With the
lacerate
regolith
my
itself?
lungs.
Yeah, would you eat it?
Of course not.
Well, he didn't say breathe it. He said
Kara?
eat it. But
I don't want it anywhere near me.
But what about if it was in a
safety
milkshake?
tested?
No.
Right,
It's full of tiny razor blades.
but if it's
you would not want
purified.
to eat that.
All right, but in a weird way, I'm going to tell you about how you
I'm
wouldn't actually
skeptical.
mind eating moon regolith.
If it was converted into something else.
Yeah, I'm talking about growing food and using the moon regolith for this, right? So, in a way, you would be eating it. You know what I'm saying? You see that? Wasn't clever enough for you, Steve?
No.
Okay. It's kind of the same thing as eating moon dirt. All right.
Is
anyway.
it? So that means we're eating cow manure every time we eat crops.
From a
Buy it.
certain point of view, okay? The Artemis moon missions are delayed, whatever. They are underway, though. We're in midstream here. It seems likely that, people will be spending time on the moon in the future at some point. And what the NASA scientists are doing is they're trying to prepare for this and trying to think about everything, all the technologies that they're going to need. And scientists are actively working on figuring out how to grow food on the moon. And it's not just growing food on the moon. They want to use the moon's regolith to do this. Now, why would we worry about that? Well, first of all, of course, it's going to be incredibly expensive and risky to constantly be shipping food from the Earth off to the people at the moon. It's expensive. It's impractical. It just isn't the right way to go about it. Like maybe in the early missions, sure, but eventually we want them to be as self-sufficient as possible. And at some point, astronauts are definitely going to need to grow some of the things that they eat on the moon. And hence, this is why scientists are looking into this. There was a new study published in Scientific Reports, and they looked at whether that might actually be possible using the lunar regolith. Now, if you don't know, this is the material that covers the moon's surface. It's not soil. It's regolith. It doesn't have all the properties of soil. Soil has microbes, organic matter in it, right? And regolith is essentially just crushed up rock. And some of it has been crushed up so much it's a fine powder. And because it doesn't have this biological complexity that soil has, it's impossible to grow food in it. And the particles are sharp, they're chemically reactive, they're structurally unstable, and from a farming perspective, it's essentially the worst possible growing medium.
There's also some toxic elements in there, like heavy metals.
Definitely.
And it was the bane of the existence of the astronauts. They hated that crap. It's nasty, nasty stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Bob, this was like an Anakin Skywalker level thing here. I mean, it's like it's coarse. It gets into everything. It's bad stuff. It really is something that you don't want to have to deal with. So what do? They wanted to figure out how to test if plants could grow in the moon's regolith. So what they did was first they had to get a lunar regolith simulant, right? And we have it. It mimics the chemistry and the physical properties of material collected during the Apollo missions. And it's a very good similarity, right? It is going to show similar results as the real thing. They mix that simulant with something called vermicompost. And this is an organic fertilizer that's produced when earthworms break down organic waste, right? Because they're breaking down organic waste and then they're pushing things into the soil that they're moving through. So vermicompost, it's important because it has nutrients, organic matter, it has microbes, so all the things that lunar regolith doesn't have that the soils on Earth have. And that's why we have such a fertile planet.
Now, Jay, these are specifically with the red worms, which you can use to compost on Earth. So there's like basically a couple different ways of composting, and one of them is just throw those red critters in there and they eat everything.
Now, Steve, is there any worry about overfeeding these red worms and they'd grow big
Spice?
And then they'd start to produce
They turn
spice?
into
Yeah.
sandworms?
Are you worried about this?
No, not until now.
All right, well, we got to start looking into it, All right, so the researchers chose to grow chickpeas of all things.
Garbanzo beans.
These are also known as garbanzo beans. Our first collective family interaction with chickpeas was that my mom used them for a soup that she made, which I still am trying to figure out how, and it was fantastic.
It was chijita.
It was called chijita. That definitely is a local Italian
That's in
slang
Neapolitan
word.
dialect.
With little elbow macaroni with it, right? And Parmesan.
So this crop
on it.
makes sense
And-
for a number of reasons. For potential space agriculture, they want something that's going to be high in protein, right? Because we're all freaking out about protein, right, Bob?
Yes, we are these days.
Chickpeas are nicely compact. They form, helpful relationships with microorganisms in the soil. It's a good plant that they selected. So to strengthen the partnership that I'm talking about, the researchers coated the chickpea seeds with something called arbuscular mycorrhizal.
Not even close.
All right, whatever. Say it. I tried. Arbuscular mycorrhizal. It's a fungi.
Yeah, he's a fun guy to hang out with.
All right, look, you can look it up in your own time. These fungi colonize plant roots and send out microscopic filaments. You may have seen this in what's that TV show, Steve?
The Last of Us?
Last of Us. Yeah, you've seen this in The Last of Us, right? The little filaments come out. What they do is they act like extensions of the plant's root system. And I'm not making fun of that. That's really powerful. It's very useful. It essentially allows the plants to gather more water and nutrients and everything that they need. So it's very helpful. And once it's in place, they help the plants survive. And particularly in environments where there might not be a lot of the things that the plants need to survive. So these plants were grown in several different mixtures of the regolith simulant and the vermicompost. Some mixtures had relatively small amounts of regolith, others were dominated by it. And of course, there was one that was pure regolith with no compost at all as the baseline, and the results were promising. And I'm very interested in what they found because it was even more viable than I think they suspected it would be. The chickpeas were able to grow and produce seeds in mixtures of the soil containing up to 75% lunar simulant, which is a lot of the regolith. But as the amount of regolith increased from there, the plants clearly started to struggle and they grew smaller and produced fewer seeds. And in the treatment that used 100% of the regolith, the plants germinated, which they would essentially do with liquid, but eventually died before producing seeds, as expected. But something interesting was observed. They thought that plants growing in the regolith that were heavy with regolith mixtures would produce fewer seeds, and they did. But the size of the seeds didn't change, and that's what surprised them. They expected the stressed plants to grow smaller seeds, but they always grew normal-sized seeds, which is good because even if any of these plants that they're using would get stressed out, they would still be growing something that's edible and that could be replanted. They also observed that the mycorrhizal.
You're saying that right, Jay.
Thank you, Kara.
So who was this guy, Mike, anyway?
Yeah. The fungi, right? It successfully colonized the chickpeas roots, even in the harshest regolith mixtures that they made. Their presence improve the plant survival and growth. So all the numbers were pointing in the right direction. Maybe the most interesting thing, though, was that the microbial activity actually began changing the regolith itself. So what that means is there were biological processes happening that help bind these tiny regolith particles together into larger clumps. And that might not sound significant, but it is, because it's actually making the regolith turn into something that behaves more like real soil rather than loose dust. So over time, you would imagine, after doing this on the moon for long enough, that they would have quite a body of soil up there, which would be great.
Yeah, but you're right though. Like the once they have a patch of regolith that they're farming, and they've mixed in enough of the stuff so that it's workable soil, over time it'll get better and better and better.
Yeah.
But you didn't mention also that they found that the mycorrhizal that was self-sustaining in the regolith. Like once they just put that in the regolith, and it was able to reproduce and self-sustain. So they may only have to do that once. And then it'll keep going.
Yeah, I couldn't find any information on how much area they'd need, what would the real numbers look like, what would the enclosure be like. They don't really have answers for any of that yet. I just read another news article that was talking about they're going to be sending robots down into the lava tubes and really check them out and really, really actually say, should we use these? Which I think they should. And I know Bob does, because that's why I think they should. Anyway, this is cool. They're going to probably be testing other plants, other things to vary the diet up. And hopefully, within how many years would it be at this point? But before people would actually need to harvest food on the moon, 5, 10 years.
Yeah, something like that.
They'll get there. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. They're doing similar research for Martian regolith as well. I think the Martian regolith is worse actually than the lunar regolith, because it has
there's
some pretty nasty toxins
and no nitrates. Yeah, it's not good soil, man.
pH is terrible. Yeah. They need to do more than just throw some red worms at it.
There's at least some evidence, right, that some things have existed in Martian regolith in the past, as opposed to the moon.
They've also used simulated Martian regolith, and they were able to grow stuff in it, but they just have to change it a lot more than the lunar regolith to get it to be soil, basically. Mm-hmm. So doable, but it would take some work. The good news with this, though, is that the astronauts can just take any of the food waste they have, or even just organic waste, doesn't have to be food waste. They can compost all the stuff that they bring with them to the moon. They don't have to dispose of it. They just sort of compost it all with these red worms and have it there when they to use to make soil.
Yeah.
What about their own poop?
Yeah, everything.
Generally, you don't use your own poop in.
No, you can eat it.
Yeah, but I wonder if there's a way to clean it.
Yeah, they would have to make sure they treat. You don't want the pathogens to. You
don't want the pathogens, but you want the good bacteria.
Yeah, but Steve, if they mix it in with the soil, what would be the bad situation?
Oh,
there?
It's bad. You don't want to do that with animal excrement or human excrement. Don't put poop in your compost. Will make people sick.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't put poop in compost, but also
what can you put?
There's if you're going to use human manure to grow crops that we eat, then that's what they call it, human manure.
Portmanteaus.
Then you have to treat it. You have to make sure that you're not passing, GI pathogens through to the food.
Yeah, I mean, we can drink toilet water now because we have ways to purify it. So
yeah. All right, Kara. I understand that sea level rise is far worse than we thought.
Shocker.
Yay.
Good news, everybody. So there's a really interesting article that was published in Nature, I think just yesterday, called Sea Level Much Higher Than Assumed in Most Coastal Hazard Assessments. Yeah, this is I think this is making a lot of waves in the scientific community right now. No pun intended. And it really comes down to, why do you think one study could somewhat confidently say, I'm going to ask you, Bob and Jay, one study could kind of confidently say, everything we thought we knew is probably an underestimate.
So
why do you think that is?
Yeah, how could one study say that?
Is it a meta study? Is it a meta study?
Is this the first one that was properly funded?
Well, what the authors are claiming is that this is the first one that actually used the methodology correctly.
Oh, geez. Okay.
And so what they did is they looked at, yes, you're right, Bob, they looked at 385 other studies between all peer-reviewed, between 2009 and 2025, and more than half of them were just in the past 5 years. And they were looking at like coastal flood exposure, vulnerability and risk, looking at global and regional hazard assessments. And they looked at the methodology that was used in all of these, and they found that 99% of those studies likely used incorrect or insufficient methodology in order to estimate the height of the ocean. So how could so many people have gotten it so wrong? Well, that's an important question, but I think we first have to go back to, how do we know how high the ocean is?
Well, are we just measuring the averages, and then we could know how much above that average it is?
It reminds me of snowfall that we've had. It's like trying to estimate how much snow do we get. Well, how do you know? Because there's drifts and all these different things that the environment makes it hard to get you that average. I know there's good ways to do it, but I don't know exactly what they are. It seems kind of related.
Moving beyond averages, and let's say we're talking about pretty specific measurements in very specific parts of the Earth. We only know how high the ocean is relative to how high the land is, right? That's what we're concerned about. When we talk about sea level rise, we're talking about how does the sea level compare
That's
to
all
the
that matters,
land level. We don't really care how tall the ocean is from the floor to the surface. We want to know, is the sea rising up in such a way that it is starting to flow over the land, and are low-lying coastal regions going to be flooded out? So how do we measure land height?
Well, you see those guys with those things.
Those guys with those things. I mean, you could do it from the sea level, right? Or you could do it from the ocean bottom, right, to the top. There's different types of measurements you can make.
But you're right, Bob. It's the guys with the things, right? Like, we have tools that are available to us that allow us to measure how high a coastline is. And those tools are pretty much consistently used across the globe. The problem is the tools that we use to measure how high the water is aren't consistently used. And what these researchers found is that amongst those 385 peer-reviewed papers, 90% of them only relied on something that was called the geoid model. Do you guys know anything about the geoid model?
What is the shape of the Earth, right?
Yeah, I had to dig into it. So it's a modeling technique, and I love the way that Bethany Brookshire defined it. She said, a geoid can be imagined as an irregular, undulating blue ball representing the global ocean based on data about Earth's gravity and rotation. Yep. So it's a model that takes into account both gravity and rotation. The problem is, and it is irregular and it is undulating, so it's a little bit more precise than just saying we live on a smooth, round Earth, right?
Yeah, gravity is different over different parts of the Earth because of the mass that's below you varies enough where it's actually measurable. Yep. So the gravity maps you might have heard of.
Mass, density, and pull all together help map out this full geoid model. The problem is what geoids don't take into account are ocean circulation, currents, winds, tides.
Not even tides?
Water temperatures. All of those things influence the sea level. And so what you're apparently supposed to do when you use geoids to predict or to model out sea level rise and then compare it to the more accurate actual measurements of the height of the Earth in the different areas where you're measuring, is you're supposed to use model corrections that account for ocean circulation, currents, winds, tides, water temperature, all those different things. And what they found is that in this study, 90%, or across all of these studies, 90% of them only use the geoid as their comparison. Just straight up, they used this model that at one point in time was really state of the art and was the standard. So a lot of scientists who were in training during the time when the geoid was like the hot new science, that became their anchor, right? That became their standard. And so they found that 90% of studies that were published between those years only use the geoid as a comparison to land height. And then another 9% use the geoid along with other measurements, but they didn't apparently align the data appropriately. So their comparisons between sea level and land elevation did take other factors into account, but when they reran their statistical analyses or the different techniques that they used, they found that they weren't modeled appropriately. So they found that only 1% of all of the studies that they looked at used both a sophisticated understanding of geoids and all of those other ocean measurements, and then compared them appropriately to the sophisticated land elevation measurements that we already have.
It's like, I feel like I want to go to those guys, those people, those scientists that did those 1% and just shake their hands. Like, you got it. You're in the 1% club.
And so what they did, this was a postdoc, don't remember where she was. I'm so sorry. And then the primary author was at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And what they did is they actually were able to look at this big data set of sea levels that were based on satellite measurements of the ocean surface, and they compared those to the models that were used in all of these studies at different locations throughout the Earth. And they found that they were sometimes really far off. And so on average, they were 24 to 27 centimeters too low. So that's about 10 inches. But sometimes the discrepancy was way worse. They found that in Southeast Asia and around Indonesia and parts of the Pacific, there was like a meter difference. So these places underestimated sea level by upwards of a meter. And then in other places, it was overestimated, like all around Antarctica. And you can see the model maps online if you look it up. There's a great New York Times article that shows sort of the differences. But you see that most of the discrepancy is happening sort of in the Indian and Pacific Oceans around Southeast Asia. And most of the accurate readings are happening around Europe and the Atlantic part of the Americas. And so we're finding that different techniques were being utilized in different parts of the world. And unfortunately, some of the places where the underestimation is the greatest are the places where the detriment from sea level rise will also be the greatest. And so, there are different takes on this data. Some people are saying, this is a big deal. We've been I like this quote from Torbjorn Torvquist at Tulane, who said this is a big wake-up call. We finally have a robust effort to sort this out. And then he said, it turns out we've been comparing apples to oranges nearly all the time, because we can't take the data from land measurements, which is really exact, and compare it to the data from ocean measurements, which uses a totally different approach. That's much more of a smooth model. But then there are other scientists who are saying, listen, people who are near high tide flooding know what high tide flooding looks like. This is not really going to change a lot of policy. We know that the sea is getting higher. We know that these people are at risk. Okay, maybe it's a lot worse, but it doesn't really affect our scientific study of the rates of sea level rise. It just means that we're starting from a worse point than we thought we were.
Yeah, it's terrible. It reminds me of studies over the last few years which found that, the warming is maybe not going to be as much as we thought it was going to be, but the negative effects of that amount of warming is worse than we thought it was going to be.
Right.
So
yeah,
this is similar. It's like, the sea level rise is worse for any given level of warming than we thought, which of course increases the urgency to do something about it.
And we've got to remember, too, that most of these studies, like one thing that's important to note in a science news write-up is that 45 of the reference studies were by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. So, these studies are directly influencing policy. And what they're basically saying is that, or I'm sorry, if we're talking 1 meter higher than we thought, and add to that a 1 meter rise that we predict will happen over the next century, we're talking millions, hundreds of millions of people who are now just homeless, who have to move inland, who are climate refugees. It's a slow process, but we can't just ignore that it's happening. We have to plan for it, and one way to plan for it is to accurately measure it.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Kara. So, guys, I get email. I get lots of email. And one type of email I get is people who are pushing stories or interviewees or whatever, right? They're like, hey, this would be good for you to talk about on SGU or to write about on science-based medicine or whatever. They're almost all crap, right? It's almost all just people marketing themselves, or they're, publicists marketing their people. And rarely is it useful to us. But occasionally people market pseudoscience to me, which I always find amusing. And I do use sometimes as a source of material to write about critically, which I know wasn't their intention when they sent it to my attention.
Yeah.
And that's what happened this time. So somebody sent me a press release kind of, hey, this is people who are interested in treating chronic pain might want to look at this study. And it's basically saying, finally, there's evidence that energy healing actually works, right?
What?
Yeah. So, of course, I'm interested in this. And it says there's a placebo-controlled trial, randomized clinical trial, showing that Reiki specifically, is effective for chronic knee pain specifically.
But Reiki isn't a thing, so how can you have a placebo against Reiki?
Yeah. What do you think? What is placebo Reiki?
Well, they call it in the study. I just looked. They call it
Fakey. Yeah, it's fakey.
Oh my God, I love it.
Oh my God, it's happening.
So it's essentially you train. This is the study. The people who were doing the study did it. They're not Reiki people, right? They were just trained to mimic Reiki while distracting themselves so they don't accidentally do it, right? Because, if you have any intention to heal the person, that may trigger some actual energy healing. So you got to make sure that the people doing the Fakey are not accidentally doing real Reiki by intending to help or treat the people that they're waving their hands over. So they count backwards or do some things to distract themselves so they don't do.
So this would be like if you were comparing prayer to somebody going blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
Jesus,
right.
Blah. Okay. All right.
Okay. So there were actually 4 arms to this study, and it's of 164 adults total. So that's not a lot of patients.
No.
That's 40 per. And as Kara and I have said multiple times, 50 is a good rule of thumb. So it's a little bit below, per group.
And that's for an fMRI study.
Yeah,
for
this kind of study, this is a pilot study at best. But that's not my major problem with the study. I knew exactly. I'm going to just brag. I knew exactly what this study was going to show before I looked at it.
Bragger.
So I was not surprised at all. But what do you guys think? So again, I don't think this is a positive study. So let me tell you what the 4 groups are, and then you tell me what you think the results showed. So one group was Reiki, one group was mindfulness, one group was Fakey, and one group was a wait list control. So they're in the study, they're waiting to be allocated, they're getting their usual treatment, and that's it. Nothing else happens. So what do you think the study showed?
Probably that any interaction with a provider showed an improvement in pain.
Over waitlist control.
Yeah.
Over waitlist control.
That.
I agree.
I like that one.
Close.
Okay.
What it showed was that if you compare Reiki to waitlist control, there was statistically significant benefit. If you compare mindfulness to waitlist control, there was statistically significant benefit, and it was a little more. Mm-hmm. If you compare Fakey to the waitlist control, it was improved over the waitlist, but it wasn't as much, and I don't think it was statistically significant. And if you controlled Reiki to mindfulness, I think the mindfulness was a little bit better, but I don't think that was statistically significant either.
I also I'm looking here, and all they report are p-values. I don't see any effect sizes.
Yeah.
Any p hacking going on?
And their Reiki is p of 0.02.
So if you compare, so this is the only comparison that matters. With all of this, there's only one comparison that matters, and that's Reiki versus Fakey. Because that's the only, at least, has a chance of being blinded comparison. Now,
true. Everything else is just provider effects.
Right. It's placebo effect.
Non-specific effects. Yeah.
You're comparing to weightless control. That's unblinded, worthless for chronic pain. It's totally
people who don't
worthless.
feel well having somebody listen to them and say, I'm going to do something to help you, and then experiencing what they think is
totally.
help. Of course, that's going to have an effect.
Yeah, it does mindfulness. And by mindfulness, you can read just relaxation. Does that help you feel like your chronic pain is not
lowering your
you
stress?
As much?
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, and also, like, it totally depends on how you do this, but mindfulness for pain relief is a common practice in psychology, and it works very well. Like, we have a lot of good studies that show that it works
because
very
pain
well,
is distractible.
Yes, because pain is subjective.
Yes.
Like, and so if you can do things psychologically to help people not focus on their pain or just to have a different relationship with their pain, of course it's going to have a positive benefit. But usually that's not a single session, and it's not, it's like, what is, quote, mindfulness? That's way too vague.
Even in the mindfulness literature, we talked about this on the show years ago. There was a paper by mindfulness researchers said, we do not have an operational definition of mindfulness. There's no consistency in the literature as to what it actually is. But anyway, that's a distraction. So the only comparison that actually mattered, in my opinion, in this study was Reiki versus Fakey, and it was not statistically significant.
Oh my God. So they're saying the Reiki was better because, look, this many more people responded. But if you compare the two,
right? So
it's chance alone.
That is a very common statistical error that clinical papers make. They compare placebo to baseline and treatment to baseline and show that they're different. But you need to compare treatment to placebo. That's the only comparison that matters. And this comparison was not statistically significant. They said there's a trend, which means negative, right? So this is a negative study. And they are selling this completely negative study as if it shows finally that energy healing works. It's complete nonsense. This is every time somebody sends me an acupuncture study, that's what it shows. So that's why I knew what it was going to show. That's always my number one hypothesis. Oh, I bet you they compared to no treatment, and that was significant, and then they compared to sham treatment, and that wasn't significant, and that's exactly what it showed.
Yeah.
So don't fall for it, but they're marketing it as if it shows it works, which is basically a lie, right?
Ugh.
And as you say, Kara, like, it can't work because it's nothing, right? Because there is no energy, there's no life energy, they're not doing anything. But here's the thing. I'm sure, it's very likely, and there's lots of evidence to back this up, that the attitude of the treater affects the degree of the placebo effect. It's the therapeutic interaction. So if you're telling the fakey people to look distracted and don't engage and count backwards, of course you're not going to get as much of a placebo effect as somebody who is having that therapeutic connection. With
this is
their
not
client.
double blind.
Yeah. So that's what I said.
That's by definition. It needs to be double blind.
It's not
with
properly
something, which you
blind.
can't.
They made an attempt to blind it, but I question the blinding. And what they didn't do is measure the blinding, right? So what you could do is ask participants, do you think you were in the treatment group or the control group, and see if there's a difference. And I don't see that they did that here, unless I missed it. I'm looking through it again.
But even if they did, I still don't think that's robust enough because what they can verbalize is different than what they're feeling in the moment. And I also just think, by definition, it's just not double blind. It's single blind. Like the people, and it's not even well blinded, as you mentioned.
It wasn't single blind. If you're doing Reiki, you know it. And if you're doing Fakey, you know it. It was not blinded at all.
Yeah, that's true. I was going to say that the practitioners were not blinded, but the patients were. But the patients aren't really either.
Yeah. They were not blinded to the weightless control. They were blinded to. Yeah, you're right. They were technically blinded to the treatment, but as we're saying, probably not well.
Right.
Yeah, that's why we double blind things, because if the provider knows that they're giving a placebo or a therapy, they are going to act differently towards the
even
patient.
if it's unconscious, absolutely unconsciously, they could do that.
Totally. And again, there's direct evidence that has a huge effect. In fact, that's the only effect. The only effect is basically the therapeutic relationship. And the better you are at that, the more of an effect there is. The experience of the practitioner doesn't matter. Whether it's real or sham doesn't matter. Nothing else matters except that interaction with the therapist.
100%. And especially with a population like this. I mean, there's no underestimating the power of somebody who has chronically been in pain, who feels like they're not being heard, not being seen, and who is desperate for an answer. And somebody saying, hey, I've got something that might help you.
Yeah.
You're going to have expectation effects there.
Absolutely. Steve, did you reply to the email? And what did you say? No. Oh, yeah.
We just did.
I'll probably write about this on Science-Based Medicine next week too. Bob, so this is your second neurological news item this week. You encroaching on my territory?
I'm totally taking over, dude. You're done. Guys, I've been seeing this all over the news lately, at least in my news feeds anyway. Researchers are now using neurons on a chip to play the video game Doom. Have you guys seen this? Have you come across any stuff on this? So what I want to explore about this is, why is this actually funny? How exactly are they pulling this off, and why should you care? Okay, so we're starting with Cortical Labs. This is the Australian biotech startup that is doing this. They actually did something similar in 2022 using Pong. You guys remember Pong? It's just probably one of the earliest games. You control a paddle on one end, and your opponent controls it on the other end of the screen. The ball goes back and forth, and you got to move the paddle up and down. Basic stuff. Here, and for Pong, they used mouse and brain cells on a chip. This time, they are using basically Doom. It's not exactly Doom. Well, you guys remember Doom, right? This was 1993. Yeah. It was the first consolidated first-person shooter genre game that it really took off. It was kind of horror and science fiction. Demons essentially invading from hell. I remember playing it. It was
the only game. That was the only game I deleted from my computer because I was too addicted to it.
Oh, wow, Steve.
Whoa. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I don't delete games that I'm addicted to. That's like the good part.
Right. So they went to Doom because for multiple reasons, but it's far more complex, right? This is a 3D environment, whereas Pong was basically just 2D on your screen. Technically, though, Doom is 2.5D. Have you guys heard of that one? And that just means that the creatures they're not 3D models. They're just more two-dimensional kind of creatures that kind of seem 3D in a way. So it's 2.5D, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. And it wasn't really even necessarily Doom that they were using in this scenario. It's a copyright-free game called Free Doom, which uses the Doom engine, but it's basically essentially Doom for all intents and purposes. Now, this is funny because the phrase, "Can it run Doom?" is an internet meme. This is a big internet meme if you're in the biz. This is in 1997, Doom released its source code. And over time, Doom had been ported to all sorts of different hardware systems, ATMs, cell phones, digital cameras, graphing calculators, all sorts of things, oscilloscopes and pianos, printers. They just ported this stuff everywhere. So Doom, the idea that can it run Doom is basically this universal benchmark for testing, hardware versatility. So it's just a goofy meme that you may have heard often. So running this on Doom was just kind of like a hat tip to that in a lot of ways. So what we're dealing with here is a biological computer that's called CL1 for Cortical Labs, right? CL1. The operating system is called BIOS, which is lowercase bi, uppercase OS. BIOS for biological operating system. It's not BIOS as the firmware that's stored on the motherboard, your motherboard chip. Was it basic input output system? It's not that. So it's, sounds identical At least that's how I think you would pronounce it, BIOS. That's the OS. All right. So the neurons, it's called a biological computer because there's neurons in this loop here. And they use 200,000 neurons, which sounds like a lot, but people have about 86 billion neurons. So, it's not a lot. But these are genuine neurons. They're not simulated neural networks, which you probably have heard about a lot. They essentially took donated adult skin or blood cells, right? And they reprogrammed them to become induced pluripotent stem cells. And then these stem cells become differentiated into cortical brain cells. So this is where these brain cells are coming. They're not like harvesting brain cells from people. They're creating them.
Bob, how long do those neurons live in that system?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Jay. They have an enclosed internal life support system for these neurons. So they are protected. It's temperature controlled. There's even waste filtration. There's, special gas mixing and circulation. So they're really taking care of these neurons, and they can live for up to 6 months. So not bad, except after 6 months, like, damn, they all died. I got to do all this again.
Sounds like the precursor to brain in a jar.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, Steve, when I've seen like AI generated images for this news item, and it showed a full ass brain like, connected by wires. It's like, come on, 200,000, not 86 billion. So, okay, so we've got the neurons, and the neurons are sitting on an array of electrodes. And these electrodes have access to all the neurons, and they can stimulate the neurons, and they can also read the cellular activity, the spikes, right, from these neurons as well. So that's critical. So how does this interact with the video game? So what's happening is they take the video feed and they convert that into patterns of electrical stimulation. And the neurons have a specific firing pattern, right? That when they're stimulated by the video output, the neurons fire, and that pattern is mapped to the game action. So the way the neurons fire can be mapped to the actions like moving and shooting and ducking, right? The main things that the character can do in Doom, these neurons can also control that. And of course, initially it's going to be very haphazard. So it made me think, well, how do they train these guys? How do they get better at what they're doing? So they have a reward correction feedback loop. That one really confused me because I'm like, how do you reward neurons? I mean, you're not going to give them dopamine. You're not going to give them little peanut butter cups. How does a neuron get rewarded in a way that it will actually take note of? You know what I mean? So when a goal is achieved, this is how it works. When a goal is achieved in the game, like, oh, look, the neurons fired and shot that demon. When a goal is achieved, signals are sent. These are like reward signals. And if a mistake is made, like it gets killed after doing something stupid, then corrective signals get sent as well. So what does that mean? If there's a reward, if the neurons do something correct, it gets a very structured stimulation. All right, it gets a quick little burst of stimulation that's structured and quick and nice. You know what I mean? If the neurons do something incorrect, it gets a random noisy stimulation. Now, I didn't know this, but apparently neurons will self-organize to avoid noisy, chaotic input, and they will keep predictable inputs. So that is actually a way to make the neurons self-organize by sending the corrective stimulations, whether it's a reward or whether it's a mistake. So that's how that works. And that was
they're inducing like kindling, basically, which is what you typically want to see in a network when you're doing research. Yeah, they're just inducing regular organized firing. But I wouldn't say that like the neuron wants to fire in an organized way and it doesn't want noise. I think that's kind of going a bit far.
Well, it's the way they put it is that the neurons self-organize to avoid the self-organization is structured in a way that it avoids the noisy chaotic inputs, and it self-organizes to optimize the predictable inputs. Maybe that's a better way to put it, but that's basically what I think.
Yeah, I think it's just neurons are going to self-organize in this like predictable like bzz, bzz, bzz pattern when they're in vitro, like when they're in a disconnected network. And so if it gets chattery and weird, you'll find that they tend towards self-organizing. But I don't know if they're like, quote, avoiding the noise. I think they're just doing what they do.
Oh yeah,
Does that make sense?
they're absolutely
Yeah,
doing what they're doing. But my understanding, as I said, is that they're going to self-organize in a way that seems, my take is that they're going to self-organize to optimize the behaviors that produce the predictable inputs. And
yes,
right,
it's like the quote good inputs, or the ones that are quote wanted aren't really good or wanted. They're just more efficient.
Right. Okay.
And the other ones are less efficient, so it's more work for the neurons.
Right. So then I came across a quote by Alan Luffler, who's a scientist at Cortical Lab. So he explains this in a different way. He says that when a demon appears on the left of the screen, specific electrodes stimulate the sensory area of the neural culture on the left side. The neurons react to that stimulation. We then listen to their response, the spikes, and interpret that activity as motor commands. If the neurons fire in a specific pattern, the doom guy shoots. If they fire in another pattern, he moves right, and so on. So that's another way to look at what was happening here. How do you guys think this system performed? How good do you think their performance was?
I think it was able to play, but very badly.
Essentially, yeah, it was not great. Not going to win any competitions. Essentially, beginner, like it played like a beginner who was maybe even worse than a beginner because they never really even like saw a computer before in a way. So not great, but that doesn't matter. The takeaway is that they observed the cells learning in real time. And that's, with these rewards, it showed real learning in real time, as they say. So they also described this as, this was interesting, Steve, you'll like this one. They described it as synthetic biological intelligence, not artificial intelligence, but synthetic biological intelligence. And that's obviously because these are actual neurons doing some of the computing.
It's not intelligent. I struggle with this.
Yeah.
This has been done a million times before. It's just, okay, they're playing Doom, but they're not really playing Doom. They're either choosing A or B, and then they're interpreting that as go left, go right. And then they're interpreting that as, look, they're playing Doom. Like, it's like they're hooking up an external representation of the neuronal activity and saying then that the neurons are playing Doom.
Yeah,
I don't like this study. This bothers me. I feel like we were doing this in our lab decades ago. Like, this is not that interesting to me that we can train brain cells. That's like their whole job.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they do naturally, is learn from inputs.
Yeah, but I don't think there's never been a system quite like this. And here's an interesting angle here. They are describing this as a commercial platform that they're selling their CL1 biocomputer. So you can buy these. I don't know if it's available now, but they actually have, I've seen prices for these, like $35,000 per unit. And they have 30 unit racks, and it takes, it uses like 1,000 watts per rack. So they actually want to sell these to researchers. Well, I mean, this then gets into, what are you going to do with this? And they said they can do things like drug and toxicity testing, disease modeling. They say they can do brain plasticity learning experiments, and these seem like interesting research models that they can use this for.
Yeah, but sorry, what I'm asking is, what are they actually selling? Is it the hookups? Like
everything, the entire CL1, the CL1 biocomputer, including everything that you need.
To me, the interesting advancement there is actually being able to take a nerve cell network and freeze it and ship it and have it be functional. But all the other stuff, I don't know. It's like I was working in a lab in like 2007 where we had monolayer neuronal networks that we were using as exactly what you were talking about. Like they were like a detector, like a biodetector, because we could watch how the nerve cells were reacting to the different patterns of different drugs. So we drop a drug on the nerve cell and then we see how they chatter. Drop a different drug, see how they chatter. And then that tells us, based on our very elaborate setup. For us, it was linked to listening. So we could listen to different, basically nerve songs based on their chatter. Here, they're hooking it up to a video game. But it's all this, I don't know. I just don't understand why this is new. Steve, am I missing something?
I just think it's an incremental, advance in complexity.
Yeah, okay.
I agree. It's not anything
it is.
fundamentally different. I think, first of all, the headlines are because brain cells playing Doom, and that's it.
Yeah, of course.
But otherwise,
that was smart on their part.
Otherwise,
to pick
this is
Doom.
an incremental advance. It was playing Pong. Now it's
Exactly,
doing
it is.
something that's more complicated, and it is doing stuff. It is navigating the maze and shooting stuff. It's just not good at it.
And they describe it as programming, like they can program it to do this. And I think that's an interesting aspect. But also, it's important to keep in mind that these neurons are not running Doom. There's a silicon computer in there that's running Doom in the sense of rendering the graphics, updating the physics, game state things, and handling the inputs. The neurons are essentially acting as the player controller. That's it. That's really what it's doing. It's not. But the whole system itself, though, the CL1, which is everything, that's essentially running Doom. It's basically doing the entire thing. Farther in the future, is trying to think, where can we go with this? There's some speculation that in the future, if this takes off and works well enough, there could be potentially like hybrid systems where you have this subset of your computer system that's the living systems of neurons that can do some narrow jobs really, really well. That's optimized for. There's also some talk
But
of.
I don't think they'll be able to. That's my thing. Like, I don't think this wetware is going to be nearly as good as your actual hardware and software. They suck at playing Doom. And it's like really expensive to do this.
Dealing with like messy environments, like biological systems, and it can. I mean, this is at least what they're saying. They might be able to be optimized for working with messy systems that are not that our conventional digital systems don't do extremely well. I mean, that's kind of what they're saying.
I don't buy it.
Yeah,
I don't think there's going to be any near-term application. I think this is a proof of concept, and we have to see where the tech goes.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I just don't think living neurons inside of our hardware is ever going to be a viable approach to technology.
Not in the short
this is
term.
not going to be in your desktop.
No, it's not going to be in anything. It's
absolutely
way
not.
too expensive. It's too finicky. It just seems like
even
it
for
seems
research,
like they're going in the wrong direction.
just even pure research. You don't think this has any potential at all for like drug and toxicity testing, disease modeling?
But what I'm saying is we already do research like this. That's not new. We've been doing it for decades.
Yeah, but not like this. I don't think we've done it like this where you can actually. You're talking about freezing neuronal networks. This is more on the programming side of having the network optimize for some specific
No. I wasn't
task.
talking about free. No. I think you misunderstood me. Everything we did was on the programming side. What I'm saying is the part to me that is so cool is that they're able to freeze them and ship them out, and then they're still viable when they thaw them. That was always our hurdle in the 2000s, was actually being able to make these cells remain viable for long enough for these systems. We could ship people all of the tech, and then they could grow their own neurons on them, and then they could use the tech to do all these interesting experiments. But shipping it out with neurons on it is actually really hard to do.
And how would the life of those cells be maintained?
It's hard. You have to feed
I told you
them.
6
You have
months.
to keep them
they
sterile.
can get them for 6 months.
And
in
not
their life
everybody
support
can.
system. I mean,
life support systems are important there. That's like the main thing, because they get buildup of all these, urea, and you have to constantly feed them and take out all the toxins.
Well, that's exactly what they have. They can make these live for 6 months. So they'll.
Sorry, this is near and dear to my heart in some ways, and I probably need to dig deeper into it. And yes, I'm sure there are some incremental advances here, but the pie in the sky, hey, one day we'll be able to. Not only do I not believe that, but I don't see why you would. That's like saying one day, instead of using gas, we can put blood in our cars. They'll work so much better because blood is biological.
You think that would work?
No. And I know that's a simplistic metaphor, but I think in a way, like there's this, brains, once we just figure out how to put the brain in the computer, our computers are going to be way better. And it's like brains aren't computers.
Brains aren't
they
computers.
kind of are computers.
They kind of are.
Right? Aspects of them are.
Yeah.
They're biological computers, basically.
Oh, God.
I see what you're saying, Carrie. There isn't necessarily, but you're actually undermining your own point. Brains are computers. That's why doing something with neurons isn't fundamentally different than doing them with computer components that are not living. So why use the living neurons?
I think that's a metaphor. I think a brain being a computer and a computer being a technological, a hardware brain is a metaphor.
Yeah, they're not.
I think you're right. They're not the same.
They're not
thing,
the same
is
thing.
What I'm saying.
Brains are wetware. They operate fundamentally different. But if you have a neural
Yes.
network, that does kind of act like a brain.
It kind of acts like a brain, but I'm saying you can't just take it and drop it into a brain, and you can't just take brain cells and drop them into a computer because they are fundamentally different.
Well, I don't know that I agree. If you're using neurons as a component and you're using them to build a computer, you're building a computer out of neurons. Just like if you could certainly interface a silicon computer with a human brain.
Absolutely, you can interface those things. I agree with that fully, but I don't think that they are swappable components. And I don't think they will ever be swappable components. I think anything that uses neuronal architecture has to be optimized for using neuronal architecture.
Sure.
It will always work with the way that neurons work. It won't be like, oh, it's just a different kind of circuit.
No, I agree with that. But I think they're trying to do a brain-like process using a computer they're building out of neurons.
I agree, but I'm saying they are definitely not the first lab.
Oh, yeah. This is not new.
Probably a lot of people read this article and they're like, what the F, dude? My lab's already doing.
No, that's like most of the science news items I read. Like, this is a new and
it's just a
amazing.
really
It's
good
like,
headline.
no, this is actually one in a long line of studies. At most, this is an incremental advance.
And I think the pie in the sky thing of like one day we'll be able to is just
That's
it's
usually
marketing.
BS. Yeah,
Yeah, it's marketing so that they can get more funding.
Yeah. Or just the press needs, that's their formula. You have to say, everything sucked. Then this awesome thing did something no one's ever done before. And now everything's going to be awesome. That's basically every news item. And you have to just completely look past that sort of journalism spin at what actually happened here. And it's interesting, but it's incremental.
Yeah, and I think that's the only point, Bob, that I was trying to make is like my skepticism came from like firsthand experience working with a lab that did something not the same as this, but earlier versions of it
years
that
ago.
were
Yeah, I
somewhat
get it.
similar. Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Jay, it's Who's That Noisy time.
All right, guys, last week I played This Noisy. You guys have any guesses?
Something spinning?
Yeah, something spinning.
Not bad, Kara. Okay. Not bad. All right, well, let's dig into this. Joey Wilson wrote in and said, good morning. This is very nice when people start with that. He said, long time, first time. This week's Noisy sounds like a fishing reel for deep sea fishing. Yeah, and I thought about this, and I've actually been deep sea fishing a few times in my life, and I've heard the noise of the reel spinning out and everything, and there's a similarity between that, but you are not correct, Joey, but thanks for writing in. Another listener named Josh said, hiya, Jay. This one sounds like a laser engraver etching into a piece of metal. Probably making an SGU challenge coin. That sound is one of the number one things that people send me in. I've used it, and I've heard lots of different variations on it. And there is a little similarity for sure. If you're familiar with that noise of the laser engraver type of thing, it does have like a repetitive kind of noise like that. The laser engraver is a little bit more harsh, with more tonal change, but that was a good guess. And then Kirk from Indianapolis writes in, he said, my kiddos would like to take a stab at Who's That Noisy this week. So he has a 13-year-old, Cameron. He said blowing air into a hole. And Darren, who's 11, said gears turning each other really fast. Catherine at 6 said glass falling on other glass. And Andrew at 4 said glass falling on a car. I think all of these are very good guesses. They're not correct, but guys, keep in mind, this is hard to do. It's hard. Most people cannot guess correctly. There's only very few people that guess correctly. So it's no big deal. It's good to learn here. So bottom line is, this is something that I think all of us should have known about, but I learned about it because of This Noisy. So what is this thing? This thing is, I'll do a slower reveal. This thing is a pseudoscience device. Does that help you guys?
Is it
Science device that's spinning.
Perpetual motion machine?
No, but that was a good stab in the dark. It helps your ability to learn telekinesis. Steve, anything?
I don't know.
Something that like spins around your head.
Learn telekinesis.
Marketing says you can discover and unleash the power within you and get the most out of your hidden abilities. This is a Egely wheel, Egely. So what is this thing? It's a complete nonsense instrument. It's a handheld device that has a, kind of like a wheel in there that's spinning around, and it makes that clicky noise. Let me play it for you again. Yeah, so it doesn't, of course, help you learn anything other than how to lose your money on the internet. They say that it can help you develop telekinesis. Trying to find out more about its functioning. I think your mind is trying to slow or speed up the wheel against the motor or whatever, and that's why there's different tones and everything. I haven't used one. I haven't held one. I've seen it now a couple of times because I did some searches on the web for it. It's complete bunk. It's funny looking too, but take a look at it. It's a good thing to know. Some people out there might be using it. You might run across this in the real world, and to know what it is good as a skeptic. Anyway, that was fun. Thanks a lot, guys. I have a new noisy for you guys this week, and this noisy was sent in by a listener named Mark Cookson. You guys know who Mark is, right?
Sure.
Mark is a patron of the SGU. He has helped us out in many, many ways. Like, for example, Mark, when we were stranded in Chicago, Mark saw our show, was at the airport, saw us in distress because our plane was like delayed, and then it was finally canceled. And what he did was he got us all in to the United, like the, what do you call
it?
Lounge. The lounge.
The lounge.
So we could eat
that's nice.
real quick, use the bathrooms and all that stuff. It was awesome. And since then, Mark has continued to support the SGU. So I'd like to thank you, Mark. But I didn't pick him because he's a patron. I picked him because he sent in a really fun and interesting noisy. And I'm going to play that for you guys right now. That's it. It's short. If you think you know what this week's noisy is, or you heard something cool, you can email me at wtn@theskepticsguide.org. Steve, a few things.
Yeah.
So, we're planning our trip to Australia and New Zealand. I've been working like crazy. And you know what? I'm starting to get excited. I usually don't get excited until a couple months out, but this trip is there's a lot of great things to be looking forward to. So we will be doing 2 conferences while we are in Australia and New Zealand. One will be in Australia, one will be in New Zealand. We're going to be doing a full Nauticon conference in Australia. And there are multiple other ticketed events that we have planned for that, long weekend, right? It's going to be going from, it'll be Thursday, July 23rd to Saturday, July 25th. So if you want to find out more about those tickets and events, like an extravaganza, private show, lots of different things, just go to the skepticsguide.org and you'll see a button there that'll link you over to the appropriate website for tickets for that. We are also currently selling tickets to our Madison, Wisconsin suite of shows, right? We have 3 different shows that we'll be doing there. We'll have our SGU exclusive meetup that happens on Friday night. That's a very low number of people. I think we'll have like 20 people that will be able to get tickets for that, and you'll be hanging out with all of us. It's exclusive, and you get a lot of FaceTime, which is a lot of fun. Then we'll be doing the Private Show Plus, which is our 3-hour Skeptics Guide live show that we do in front of you, and then we do an hour of fun stuff with the audience. And then, of course, the Skeptical Extravaganza. If you want more information about those tickets, go to our website, theskepticsguide.org. We will also be at SciCon this year. This is the June 11th to 14th conference that they're doing in Buffalo, New York. You could just go to sciconconference.org, CSICONFERENC.org to get ticket information. And if you're interested in going to see us in New Zealand, you can go to conference.skeptics.nz. And you'll see all the information there to buy tickets. We'll be doing a skeptical extravaganza there as well if you're interested. So please go check that out. One more thing. We're also going to be in Madison, Wisconsin. This is going to happen the weekend of May 30th. We will have, again, the same 3 shows that we always do. On May 29th, we'll be doing our SGU, the exclusive SGU meetup with low numbers. And then we'll have our Private Show Plus on May 30th and the extravaganza on May 30th as well. All of this, all the tickets you want to find can be found on theskepticsguide.org.
Okay, we're going to do one question this week. This comes from Michael Kaut, K-A-U-T, Kaut. What do you think? He writes, could you do an update on the status of glyphosate Roundup safety? I recall you were previously mostly positive to it and skeptical of the claims of its dangers. I was therefore surprised by this episode of Veritasium, which I generally consider to be trustworthy, repeating both the carcinogenicity claims and the claims about Monsanto's seed practices. And then he goes on to say some other stuff, but and he links to the episode. Yeah, I have seen that episode of Veritasium. Other people have emailed us about this actually as well. I did write about this recently on Science-Based Medicine, so I have the latest info.
I guess I'm curious about your take on this, Steve, too, and you writing about it. Not because I, am believing the hype, but because it is curious to me the environmental impact, especially on bees. I feel like there's been a lot more evidence of that lately.
So it's complicated, is the answer. Yeah. But I'll give you my evaluation of it. Mm-hmm. So again, we always have to think about hazard versus risk, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I think that's always at the core of why there's so much confusion. And hazard is just, is there a potential for harm? And risk is, what is the actual risk of harm? So is there a hazard to it? Sure, like pretty much any chemical, high enough dose, it's going to cause some problems.
And you're talking specifically about like ingestion and health in humans.
So, there's two populations. There's the general population who gets exposed to it through eating food. And then there's the worker population who gets exposed to it because they're spraying it on crops, right?
Right.
So obviously the exposure levels are very different. Let's talk about the general population first. So what we have is there's some evidence to suggest that there are carcinogenic effects. And if you recall, we talked about this, the IARC, International Agency for Research on Cancer, designated glyphosate as a probable carcinogen. But, so is caffeine and hot liquids. You know what I mean? Like that's a very low bar.
So is meat.
And that's all hazard-based. But regulatory agencies around the world, there's not just the USA involved here, have all repeatedly found glyphosate to be of low risk, to be safe in terms of just the public exposure to it. And I said repeatedly because often they'll approve it for 5 years and then it has to get reapproved. And so they do an updated look at the evidence. They go, yep, it still looks good. The most
still safe.
There was also a good summary of the regulatory agency's data on glyphosate. What they found is that the EPA's maximum daily exposure is based on a 1/100th for sensitive populations and 1/1000th for children of the no observed effect level, right?
Okay.
So if the lowest level where there's any effect, you take 1/100th to 1/1000th of that. And so that's why the risk is super low, even though that there may be technically a hazard at high enough dose.
Right. Like if you're somebody who's producing the stuff and you're not wearing safety.
Yeah.
But that's like, again, like you mentioned, any chemical that we use is different when it's concentrated. That's why we have to be careful about regulation around, safe storage and safe shipping, and you don't dump these things and you don't whatever. But like the amount that reaches us on a daily basis and the amount that's actually, is there even any in our food?
Yeah, there is. And it's very, very low, but there are some studies which find that it exceeds those levels, but none that exceed the lowest observed effects level, right? So even though it's like technically over the EPA limit, it's nowhere near. That's why they build in a 2 to 3 orders of magnitude buffer so that nothing gets close to that minimum effect. So that's the reason why regulatory agencies approve it. And there's no there's just no evidence of any association between exposure to glyphosate in the general public and any adverse effect, right? Like that 2022 review I spoke about. Now, the only question for which I think there is some signal here is the association of non-Hodgkin lymphoma and workers with the highest level of exposure. So that's really, I think, where there's still an open scientific controversy or a scientific question, not just a public controversy. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So there are reviews which come to the conclusion that there is a persistent signal in the research. Like we keep seeing that there is this association between high levels of glyphosate exposure and a small increased risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. However, the most recent review from 2023 says that those studies are flawed, mainly because they do not control for exposure to other pesticides. And so the properly
'cause these
controlled
are-
studies
yeah.
that control for the variable of other pesticides show no signal, that there's no. And so essentially the best epidemiological study found no association between glyphosate exposure, even at the highest levels, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, when you eliminate the variable of other pesticides. The studies that do find an association all mix it with, don't control for other pesticides. And that's important because the reason why glyphosate, part of the reason why it's so popular and so widely used, is that it's the least toxic herbicide, right? Other alternatives, even organic ones, are more toxic, than glyphosate.
Well, and so when you were talking about these high exposure individuals, they're mostly probably talking about farm
it's all
right?
workers. It's all workers.
Yeah. So what they're not looking at are factory workers, and that would be really interesting. I'm sure somebody has looked at that.
Well,
but if the people who are making and handling this stuff aren't getting sick,
but that's the other thing. Well, I think when they say workers, they're just looking at high. It's not limited to farm workers. It is including factory workers. It's anybody with any kind of work exposure, including at the highest levels of anybody who gets exposed to it. They found no signal when you control for other pesticides. Yeah. So that's very reassuring. The other thing is that's kind of reassuring in that if we're not seeing a signal with the super high levels of exposure, then it becomes super implausible that there's any adverse effect for just consumer exposure, which is
completely
much, much lower.
But that still doesn't answer the question of environmental.
What's the effect on the environment? Yeah. So
and on populations of organisms.
Yeah, I mean, so the evidence there is mixed and complicated, but it's overall it's showing that it's probably not as bad as other herbicides. Especially the thing is, like, organic herbicides are worse because they're short-lived and they're less effective. So you have to use a higher dose more often, and they have more short-term effects, more acute toxicity. So the alternatives are basically worse,
Yeah, that's what I'm reading. Even with colony collapse in bees, like I'm reading that there is direct toxicity, but it's much lower than like insecticides, right? Which like people are using insecticides on their crops.
Right. And that's where, again, the risk approach is, well, what's the actual net effect here? Like, not the theoretical, it could possibly do this, there is something happening, but what is actually the net effect and how does it compare to all the alternatives?
And I think that's when people get all up in arms about like, it's when people make I guess it's not really a straw man, but they make the argument. They're not really talking about glyphosate the same way that very often people aren't really talking about genetic modification when they sort of move into an argument against monocropping or against, farming practices, which of course require that we use large quantities of chemicals.
Or you have to do, you have to pick weeds by hand, which forget about it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, it's a function of our modern farming system. And it is honestly one of the best options that we have, which is why farmers use it.
Absolutely.
Nobody's forcing them to. But then there's the question, and this was in the email, about like, what do you say to people who say, I read that Monsanto, there's a conflict of interest and they were ghostwriting a lot of these studies or funding a lot of these studies?
Yeah, so there was one study from 2000, and this is the one that gets shopped around a lot to make that point, that was retracted because there was undisclosed funding from Monsanto. And so, it's a real problem, because it does undercut the faith in this science. But these are isolated examples, right? This is not the entirety of the research. And that study was retracted. That was that one study. And again, it was from 26 years ago. There's been a ton of research since then. And let's point out also that Monsanto no longer exists. It was absorbed by Bayer. And also, the other complexity in the research is that you might read some studies that are looking at glyphosate-containing herbicides, not glyphosate, because they contain other things.
Yeah, because they're compounded now. Because because it works so well, it's become a staple in the industry.
So again, that makes it hard to draw firm conclusions. So the bottom line is, yes, there's some complexity in the research here. And yes, industry has been less than pristine, which is a problem, and it's unfortunate. But if you look at the totality of the evidence, which multiple regulatory agencies have done, even ones that are friendly to organic farming and not friendly to GMOs, they say, yeah, the evidence shows that it's safe for consumers and it's even probably safe for workers. Although it kind of depends on which studies you think are more reliable. The best studies are the ones that are negative. To me, that's the most important, pattern to look for. What do the best studies show? Mm-hmm. But does it require more research and better research? It's always hard to say no to that. And in this case, absolutely, especially since there are these lingering questions in the research. So I would say, yes, we should do clearly independent studies that are fully transparent, where we do the best design that we now know that we could do and need to do, and let the chips fall where they may. But let's also do that with all the alternatives, right? You can't just single this out and then favor using other herbicides that are less well studied and probably more toxic, because that's not what we're going for here, right? That's the great irony of the big anti-glyphosate narrative, is that it results in the use of more toxic herbicides, which is not good.
Yeah, you got to look at it in context.
Yeah. All right, guys, let's go on with science or fiction.
It's time for science or fiction.
Each week I come up with 3 science news items or facts, 2 real, 1 fictitious, and I challenge my panel of skeptics to tell me which one is the fake. You have a theme this week. The theme is medieval times.
Oh, cool.
Not the restaurant, but just everyday life in medieval times. Okay. Here we go. Item number 1. It was standard practice to dispose of waste in the streets or in piles of hay, with the first municipal sanitation systems or regulations not appearing in Europe until the Renaissance. Item number 2. Chronic infestation with fleas and lice was more the norm than the exception and was considered just a part of daily life. And item number 3, it was a common and widespread practice to divide sleep into 2 shifts, first sleep and second sleep, with 1 to 3 hours of activity in between, the practice not ending until the Industrial Revolution. Kara, go first.
Okay, so I feel like so many of these are like the common conventional wisdom kinds of things. They're all and like I feel like you're trying to get us with the first sleep and second sleep thing, but I feel very strongly that first sleep and second sleep was common. I just don't know when. I know that historically that this is how we slept, but I don't know if it was during medieval times. I don't know if it ended in the Industrial Revolution. It seems like before, like when people had kind of their local jobs, like I'm a cobbler and I'm a butter churner and I do this thing and I'm a goldsmith, that people could have lived this way. But the minute that people had to go to factories and then, school times changed and all of that, the first sleep and second sleep thing would have changed. So it seems reasonable that the Industrial Revolution was the pinch point, but it could have been earlier than that. Okay, so disposing of waste in the streets or in piles of hay. And they didn't come until the Renaissance. Oh, God. I mean, every movie about like the plague, that's what they're doing. And I thought that that's why people were always getting so sick. And then infestation with fleas and lice, more the norm than the exception. I think that's probably true because we didn't have treatments for them. And I think probably people just had to pick them out. Fleas and lice were everywhere.
Steve,
I mean,
define waste. You talking excrement or
pee
garbage?
and shit.
Yeah, that's what I thought you meant.
All right,
like
just
poo.
checking.
Yeah, pee and poo. Yeah. To understand, you're talking about common people here, though, right? You're not talking about like nobility.
I mean,
during
obviously,
the Middle Ages.
it would be worse among the 99% of commoners. but pretty much everybody was susceptible to it.
Right. Like I could say rich people still got fleas and lice, but they just probably were able to keep better hygiene because they could afford to bathe every day and things like that, or bathe whenever they needed to. So I don't know. They all seem like science. So I think the one that's like the most obvious, which is the waste in the streets one, maybe that's the fiction. Maybe it actually wasn't common practice in the Middle Ages. Maybe there was another way that people disposed of their waste and they didn't just pour it out the windows like in every movie. So yeah, I'll go with that as the fiction, but I have no idea.
Okay, Bob.
My thinking was very similar. These all seem good, but the one that kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way is, I mean, just everybody just throwing their stuff out in the streets. Everyone, I mean, over even a tiny short term, that just sounds wickedly horrible. There had to be some other. It couldn't have been that common. It just sounds way too nasty. The other ones, yeah, I've heard of the two sleep thing. I've definitely read about that, and like Kara, when exactly did it happen and when exactly did it go away? Of course, is very vague in my head. But I know there's something like that did happen, and the infestation with fleas. Yeah, man. Oof. That makes total sense. So, yeah, so the outlier, just by a little bit, is the waste in the streets. I'll say that's fiction as well.
Okay, and Jay.
Yeah, the first one, throwing waste in the streets. This is one of those things, you've seen it in the movies so many times, but it's good to question it. I've just read, quite a bit and think that is science, just because of all the different places that it's come up and the different downstream effects of that happening. So I do think that's science. The flea infestation thing, you said fleas and lice. Yeah, I'd say I would agree with that. I think that's science. They didn't have any real way of handling things, but like handling insects like that back then. And once they were there, they're there, and like, what would you do? There's only a few ways that you can mitigate that. And I don't think they really could have access to, being able to heat these things up or use chemicals and all that. The last one, this is the one that's giving me pause more than the other two, because you said it's widespread practice. Like, what do you specifically mean widespread?
More the norm than the exception.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, I would say that's the part of it I don't like. I don't think this was the norm globally.
It specifically says Europe.
Yeah, I know you're saying that, but in general, I'm saying this was something I think happened. It wasn't as regimented or typical as I think most people understand once you find out about it. Like when the first time I've read about this, it was like, oh, I never knew about this. And it's like everyone was doing it or whatever. And I don't think it was that widespread. So I'll say that one's a fiction. The sleep one is the one I picked as fiction.
All right, so you all agree on number 2, so we'll start there. Chronic infestation with fleas and lice was more the norm than the exception and was considered just a part of daily life. You all think that one is science, and that one is science. That is science. Nice. They basically, there's so much evidence, like from articles of clothing and writing, and and the ubiquity of flea combs. So basically everyone was infested with lice and fleas, pretty much. Like it was, it's hard to put a firm number on it, but it was definitely way more than 50%. It was just a chronic part of life. Some people just dealt with it, just itched. There were things. They wore flea traps. Have you ever heard of that? So it's like a cylindrical thing you wear around your nose that has holes in it. So I guess fleas crawl in, but they don't crawl out, kind of thing, which is not going to rid you of fleas, but it will reduce the number of fleas, I guess, that are on you at any given moment. And this problem was partly because it was also very common to live in much closer proximity with animals than we do. Like animals, not talking about pets, but like farm animals being in the home was very common. Mm-hmm. It also explains why the Black Plague was so bad, right? It's like this disease was spread by fleas. Everyone had fleas, Mm-hmm. All right. Let's go back to number 1. It was standard practice to dispose of waste in the streets or in piles of hay, with the first municipal sanitation systems or regulations not appearing in Europe until the Renaissance. This is kind of related to the second one. The poor sanitation certainly increases the incidence of fleas and lice. This one is the fiction. It is the fiction. And because that classic movie trope of throwing the waste out the window is an exaggeration. Did it happen? Sure.
Sure.
Was that the standard practice? No.
My God, can you imagine?
Especially in cities,
so
there was, first of all, there were lots of regulations, and some cities had elaborate systems of waste disposal. But even those, even in the Renaissance, so the idea that the first sanitation system did not appear until the Renaissance is definitely wrong. There were cities that had.
I'm sure they had that in like ancient Greece.
Yeah, that's why I had to focus on Europe. Like the Romans and the
right,
Greek.
right.
The Romans had famously way more hygiene than Europe did in the Middle Ages. There's definitely a lot of backsliding in terms of hygiene. Romans bathed very frequently, for example, whereas Europeans bathed 2 or 3 times a year. They just didn't bathe. Bathing was not their way of handling. This is also partly why they had the fleas and lice. That they didn't manage their
how in
hygiene
movies-
with bathing. They did it by. They also rarely washed their clothes because washing clothes was like beating it with a stick or rubbing it over stones. It was very damaging to the cloth. So they had linen underwear, and they would just change those frequently. But they would keep their outer clothes, and they wouldn't really bathe. But bathing was like an event you did a couple of times a year.
I am totally reconsidering where I want to go and when I get a time machine. It's just like I'm
Yes.
just not going to do it.
I always think about how in like medieval depictions in movies, there's all these like sexy sex scenes
No,
and people are like
didn't exist.
making out with their tongues. And I'm like, nobody was kissing like that with those mouths.
No, yeah. First of all, their teeth were wrecked. They were disease ridden. They were getting flea and lice ridden, and their homes. A lot of them had sod roofs with no wood or anything, so they were like mice and rats living in their ceilings. I mean,
Not
they
in your
were.
teeth, though, right?
It was.
Who knows?
They were completely infested, and I almost used this as an item, but I thought it was too obvious. That there was a lot of communal sleeping going on. Beds were expensive. You didn't have a lot of beds, so families would share beds. If you went to an inn, chances are you'd be sleeping in a bed with a stranger, and that was just accepted. So there was basically no privacy. And so, like you had sex in front of other people because like you didn't have a private bedroom. That was not a thing,
And I would have kept my mouth closed.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yep.
You imagine no brushing of the teeth.
Oh my God.
Don't forget though. I mean, you can get used to some pretty nasty smells over time.
Over time, yeah.
It wouldn't be
Yeah, that's
nearly
true.
as noticeable as if you just popped in the past and be like, we would have probably passed out
Bob,
from the smell.
so I have experienced what it smells like when somebody doesn't bathe for a very long period of time, because occasionally in the emergency room, somebody who is unhoused would come in who doesn't have access to bathing.
Yeah.
And man, was that bad. That was,
Yeah, it's brutal. And especially if they have like unhealed wounds and things.
right. It was horrible. So common waste disposal practices, they would have communal outhouses that were basically positioned over rivers, so they would wash away the waste. That was common. In a private home, you would have a pit, right? You wouldn't throw it out into the street. Everyone would pee and basically had an indoor outhouse or an outhouse. There'd be a big pit that you crapped in, and then somebody would have to manually clean it out. And there were people who did
I
that.
don't want that job.
Oh, Christ.
Yeah, that was probably the worst job. So they did stuff. They weren't just throwing it in the street, but not that never happened. It did happen. Just it wasn't just as widespread as is depicted in the movies.
Yeah.
As being like ubiquitous.
Which means
that it was common and widespread practice to divide sleep into 2 shifts, first sleep and second sleep, with
I heard
1 to
about
3
that.
hours of activity in between, the practice not ending until the Industrial Revolution, which prompts the question, what about second sleep? Then you have second breakfast. All right, so... Yeah, so then it was because, remember, there's not a lot of artificial lighting, and people, work time was work time. They weren't going to a factory. There's also people didn't have clocks and stuff. A lot.
Yeah, and biologically it makes sense.
So you would sleep for a few
Kinda
hours.
come out of REM.
Probably, I wonder. I didn't read this, but I wonder if how much of it is probably 4 hours at a shot is probably all you could do on the crappy sleeping conditions that they had.
That too. Yeah.
And then they would wake up and they would do productive work for a couple of hours. It wasn't like they're just lounging around. They'd actually do stuff. But also that was sexy time, which gets back to that because, if you and your wife wake up in the middle of the night, that's a good time to be intimate.
To hold your nose and be intimate. Yeah.
Right. And then you'd go back. Then you'd have your morning sleep. So you have your evening sleep, and then a couple of hours of activity, and then your morning sleep. And that was standard and pretty widespread. But then Industrial Revolution. Now you're punching a clock. You have to get up at 7 a.m, so you got to sleep straight through in order to get up early enough to go to the factory or whatever. So that was the impetus for the change.
So even more interesting, I think, would be how did we evolve to sleep? I mean, over those critical times when we're actually evolving, what was sleep like for humanity or proto-humanity?
Oh.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but there was a study which found that if people do the 2 sleep shift thing, their melatonin circadian rhythm adapts to that. And so it becomes their biological sleep, not just their behavioral sleep.
Interesting. Yeah. I do it unintentionally, and I don't have as long a period in between, but because of the medication that I take for my sleep disorder, I sleep for 4 hours and then I naturally wake up and I'm wide awake. I usually go to the bathroom, I take my second dose, I read a little bit, and then I go to sleep again. And sometimes it's, shorter. It's like 15 minutes, but sometimes it can be like an hour in between. And I always feel very, very rested.
Yeah, now that I don't have to get up as an alarm, I've kind of fallen to that pattern too. I get up at 2 in the morning or something because for various reasons, mainly because I have to pee. And I'm usually up for about an hour, and then I go back to sleep and sleep for as long as I need to.
People, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people sort of stir during that in-between cycle, right? Because your sleep architecture is about 4 plus 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a full 8. Like the architecture is 4
Maybe
plus
that's
4,
more artificial than natural.
Yeah, it's interesting.
All right. Good job, Bob and Kara.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
All right, Evan's not here, so I pulled a skeptical quote. I think it's been a while since we quoted Carl Sagan. So I pulled a good Carl Sagan quote.
Good move.
It is the tension between creativity and skepticism that has produced the stunning and unexpected findings of science.
Ooh.
I like that quote. Kind of captures one of the things that I think was very good about Sagan as a science communicator is he understood this sort of duality of science and skepticism is that you have to throw a bunch of crap against the wall, right? You have to have that creativity, think outside the box, where kind of anything goes. But then you have to combine that with skepticism. You have to then weed away all the stuff that doesn't work. A lot of pseudosciences, they sort of stop at the creativity part, then they just believe whatever nonsense they make up.
Yeah.
And they don't ever do the skepticism part, which is we have to study this skeptically and see if it's actually true. Right, but you need both. You need, in order to drive science forward, and that creativity aspect, that's the thing that I always admire most in scientists when they come up with some really new hypothesis. It's like I never would have thought. It's like, oh, that is brilliant. Whether it's true or not. Obviously, if it turns out to be true, they win the Nobel Prize, right, or whatever. Then they get all the accolades there are to give in science. When you think of something totally outside the box and then you prove that it's actually true, that's the best of science, right? But you need both of those aspects, and I think Sagan was good at representing that.
Yeah, man. When I can go back in time, I'm hanging out with Carl Sagan.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining me this week.
Sure, man.
Thanks, Steve.
And until next week, this is your Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. Skeptic's Guide to the Universe is produced by SGU Productions, dedicated to promoting science and critical thinking. For more information, visit us at theskepticsguide.org. Send your questions to info@theskepticsguide.org. And if you would like to support the show and all the work that we do, go to patreon.com/skepticsguide and consider becoming a patron and becoming part of the SGU community. Our listeners and supporters are what make SGU possible.